I wasn't even through the doorway before I realized I didn't belong. The rehearsal dinner was being held at the Hawthorne estate, frosted chandeliers, overpriced floral centerpieces, and the kind of polished wood that shines without being touched. I had barely stepped off the shuttle van when a young woman with a clipboard blocked my path, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ma'am, are you with the caterers?" I stared at her for a beat too long. "No," I said, adjusting the strap on my weathered handbag. "I'm the groom's mother." Her lips parted slightly, and then she stepped aside, but the smile never dropped. I took that as my cue to keep walking. My shoes were scuffed, navy and low-heeled, the kind people wear more for durability than for fashion. I'd had them resoled 3 times. I told myself that was a virtue. The room was already half full. Vanessa, the bride, stood at the center of a small gathering like a lighthouse, bright and dazzling in white silk, with pearls around her neck and a voice that carried. She was laughing at something Daniel had just said. My son, tall, angular, and recently obsessed with tailoring. He had his father's sharp nose and none of his softness. I waited for him to notice me. He didn't. I made my way to the seating board. My name wasn't there. I scanned again. Slower. No Evelyn. No Mom. Not even a Carter. I turned toward the back table and caught the eye of one of the planners. She smiled again, clipped, managerial, and walked over. "You must be Evelyn," I said, "Daniel's mother." Her smile barely shifted. "There's been a bit of a change. Let me check with the family." The family. I watched her lean into Vanessa, who glanced in my direction with that quick flick of judgment. People think older women can't notice. Vanessa said something short, and the planner nodded. Then Daniel approached me, finally. He looked good, new haircut, tailored slacks, that kind of glow you get when you know people are watching. "Mom," he said, with a softness that felt oddly rehearsed. "Can I talk to you outside for a second?" I followed without a word. We stood just outside the main doors, near a stone fountain still trickling despite the cold. The wind tugged at my coat. My bun had started to loosen in the back, but I didn't reach for it. I just waited. He looked around like he was searching for the right words in the air. "Look, I know this might come as a surprise, but we've had to make some last-minute adjustments." "Adjustments?" I said. My voice didn't waver. "Not yet." He winced. "Vanessa's parents. They've invited more people than expected. The venue has a limit. There's just not enough room." I looked at him then, not like a mother looks at her child, but like a stranger tries to gauge someone's truthfulness at a bus stop. He kept going. "And I think maybe, with everything, it might be best if you sat this one out." "Sat out your wedding?" He had the nerve to nod. My breath clouded in the evening chill. I didn't speak for a long moment. Then quietly, I asked, "Because of the way I look?" His face flinched. "Barely. It's not that." "But it is," I said. "It's exactly that." He opened his mouth, but I didn't need to hear whatever came next. I turned slowly, looking up at the Hawthorne estate columns, roses, and the kind of elite shimmer you don't question until it spits you out. Then I looked back at my son. "I see." He didn't follow me inside. He didn't even say goodbye. I walked out of that building, past the clipboard girl and the valet who didn't offer to call me a cab. I walked until I found the same shuttle driver still smoking behind the parking lot. He offered to take me back to the transit station. "You sure you don't want to go back in, ma'am?" he asked as he opened the door for me. "I've already seen what I needed to," I said. The shuttle pulled away, tires crunching on gravel. In the rear window, the estate glowed golden and perfect, exactly the way they'd wanted it, without me. I sat in the back row, my handbag on my lap, fingers curled around the worn leather handle. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, it did, but because I knew there was something deeper than grief blooming in my chest. It wasn't rage, not quite. It was remembering. Remembering the nights I sat up hemming his pants for his high school debate team. The year I worked 2 jobs so he could go to a summer program in D.C. The $65,000 I'd taken from my retirement fund when his restaurant startup needed seed money. Remembering every time I'd told him he was special, even when the world hadn't seen it yet. And now I'd been edited out of his narrative because I didn't fit the decor. My jaw tightened. Not because I wanted revenge. Not yet. But because I had never felt so clear. Let them have their polished entrance. Let them have their filtered pictures and matching monogrammed napkins. But something in me had shifted. Not broken. No, I wasn't that fragile. Shifted. I looked out the window at the dark trees passing in silence and said out loud, to no one, "You think you've written me out? but I still own the pen. The morning after the rehearsal, I opened the curtains as if I still had a reason to. Pale winter light spilled over my kitchen table, scratched oak, uneven legs, the same table Daniel used to do his math homework on while I simmered soup on the stove behind him. That chair, second from the right, still had a dent in the seat from when he used to rock back and forth and tip too far until I scolded him. He'd laugh. I'd fake a frown. Then he'd balance upright and flash that toothy grin I haven't seen in years. I sat down at that same chair, now too wide for my shrinking frame, and reached for the drawer beside the fridge. The file folder came out with a reluctant scrape. Burgundy vinyl, the edges soft with time. Inside were the records I kept when Daniel's first business idea had gone from scribbles on napkins to registered LLC. A tapas bar with a literary twist. He had called it Ink and Olive. He was 27, green as spring grass, and desperate to make his mark. "You'll get it all back, Mom. I'll pay you back before you know it," he had said, eyes on fire with that particular brand of hope. Only the young believe is enough. I didn't ask for guarantees. I just transferred the money and packed sandwiches for his long days. The business closed in 13 months. Rent too high, staff turnover, a bad Yelp review that spiraled. He called me crying one night and said he'd failed me. "You didn't fail me," I said, holding the phone with both hands like it might shatter if I let go. "You just learned what it costs to dream." That was 10 years ago. I never saw the money again. Never mentioned it, not even once, because that's what mothers do. They don't keep score. They keep going. But sitting at the kitchen table now, I felt that silence differently. It no longer felt like grace. It felt like erasure. They had forgotten. Or worse, rewritten. I pulled out the faded receipt for the wire transfer, $65,000, signed and dated. Next to it, a printout from the city's small business registry with my name listed as a co-signer. I wasn't going to use these for revenge. I wasn't even sure I'd use them at all, but seeing them reminded me that what I gave wasn't invisible. It had a weight, a cost, a name. The phone rang. I didn't answer. My voicemail light blinked later, but I didn't check it. If it was Daniel, he could sit in his own silence for a while. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning, not because the house needed it, but because I needed to move. I wiped the baseboards, polished the stove, swept behind the radiator. When I opened the hallway closet, a navy clutch fell to the floor, one I hadn't touched since Gerald's funeral. I picked it up, dusted it off, and unzipped it slowly. Inside were two things, a small metal cross from our honeymoon in Santa Fe, and a business card. Martin Quill, real estate transactions, commercial development, discreet investment. Gerald had met him through Rotary Club. Said he was the kind of man who knew how to make quiet moves in loud markets. I remembered the way Gerald said it, half admiring, half wary. I turned the card over. On the back was a handwritten note. "Tell him I vouch. For you, not for any price. G." I sat there for a long moment, card in one hand, cross in the other. Then I stood, walked to the kitchen, picked up the phone, and dialed. "Quill and Associates, this is Laura. May I speak with Mr. Quill? Tell him it's about a potential property acquisition. Quiet but urgent." There was a pause. "May I have your name?" "Evelyn Carter." Less than 30 minutes later, Martin Quill called back. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice a practiced baritone, smooth as aged bourbon. "Gerald was one of the few men I didn't have to second guess. How can I help?" I took a deep breath. "I'd like to buy a venue, not for use, not for profit, just for peace." There was a pause. "Peace," he repeated. "That's one I haven't heard before. It's called the Hawthorne Estate." A longer pause now. "That's a legacy property, high-end, weddings, fundraisers. It's not technically for sale." "Technically," I said, "everything's for sale, especially when someone hasn't paid their taxes." He chuckled. "I see you've done your homework." "I've done my living," I said. Another beat of silence. Then, "I can start some quiet inquiries. Nothing on paper yet. No names. That's all I'm asking," I said, "for now." I ended the day by changing the sheets. A strange act of defiance, but necessary. There's something sacred about clean linens. It says the story isn't over. It says you still expect guests, even if the only guest is dignity. I folded back the corner of the bedspread, slid the clutch under the pillow, and whispered into the soft hum of the empty house. "You invited everyone but me, Daniel, and now I've decided to RSVP to something of my own." By Tuesday, the phone call had become an appointment. Martin Quill's assistant called me at 8:47 a.m. sharp. "Mr. Quill can meet with you at 1:30, she said. "Discretion preferred, he'll send a car." I nearly declined the car. I'm used to buses, used to carrying myself and my things, and my silence. But then I thought of Vanessa's silk dress brushing past me at the venue entrance, and of how Daniel couldn't meet my eye when he told me I wasn't the right fit for his perfect day. So I said yes. The car arrived 10 minutes early. Gloss black Lincoln, not flashy but professional. The driver called me ma'am, and opened the door like I hadn't spent the last 2 decades being invisible in grocery store lines. The office was on the 9th floor of a glass building downtown. I passed 6 people on the way up. None of them looked twice at me, but the receptionist stood up when I entered. "Miss Carter," she said. "He's expecting you." Martin Quill's office had no clutter, just sharp furniture and sharp light. A man who never wasted a second looking for a pen. He stood as I entered and extended a hand. His suit was tailored in navy, not unlike my own, but he didn't wear it like armor. He wore it like history. "Gerald always said you were the real backbone of the house," he said as we sat. He meant it with respect. I nodded, folding my hands over my bag. "I'm not here on nostalgia." "I didn't think you were." He opened a thin folder. "Hawthorne Estate. You were right. Taxes are 3/4 behind. Their operating profit margin's been declining for 4 years. They keep it afloat through vanity bookings and high season upcharges, but the foundation is soft." "What does that mean in plain English?" "It means if someone makes a reasonable offer and it's clean, immediate, and off-market, they'll listen. And you can make that happen?" He leaned back slightly, lacing his fingers. "You're not the usual buyer, so I'll ask directly. What do you want this for?" I paused, not because I hadn't asked myself the same question, but because I knew the truth had layers. "I don't want to run it," I said. "I don't want to rebrand it, or hang up banners, or paint it blue. I just want to own the place where I wasn't welcome. I want my name on the deed they thought made me unworthy to enter." He didn't smile, but his eyes narrowed slightly in what might have been admiration. "That," he said, "I can help you with." He laid out numbers, timelines, contingencies. I listened, nodded when necessary. I signed 3 preliminary authorizations and agreed to transfer a holding fee. It would take a few days to move the rest. Liquidating bonds, a small nest egg I had no plans to use. "You'll need to see the venue again," he said at the end. "If we're going to submit a due diligence report, we'll need to walk the interior, quietly." I tapped my fingers against the armrest once. "All right." 2 days later, I stood in the parking lot of Hawthorne Estate again. This time, I wore the same navy coat, not out of stubbornness, but because I wanted the walls to recognize me. The woman with the clipboard was not there. No wedding this time. The gates were open but unguarded. Martin met me by the side entrance with a building inspector and a representative from the owners. The man was all smiles, sales pitch already unspooling. He walked us through the reception hall, ballroom, bridal suite. Everything gleamed, even empty. The space was intimidating. Cold elegance, impersonal beauty. I ran my fingers along the velvet of the guest chairs, imagining the version of me they were too proud to sit among them. "Has good bones," the inspector said. "Recent foundation work. You'd want to recheck plumbing in the north wing. Otherwise, solid." The owner's rep chimed in. "Events are already booked through fall. Plenty of opportunity to renegotiate contracts or cancel with penalty clauses if that's your preference." I didn't answer right away. I stopped in the bridal dressing room. Still smells like hairspray and expensive perfume. A faint trace of lilies, Vanessa's favorite. I looked in the large oval mirror and said aloud, "I see her now." "Excuse me?" the rep asked. "I wasn't talking to you," I said, and turned away. The sale closed the following week. I signed the final paperwork at Martin's office. He offered me a champagne toast, but I declined. I took water instead. Then I folded the deed and slipped it into the inside lining of my handbag. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table again, this time with the deed in one hand and a pen in the other. I wrote nothing. I just held them, weight and ink, and thought about the people who say power has to be loud. But real power? Real power is quiet. 3 days after the papers were finalized, a cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. My name written in a loopy script I recognized immediately. Vanessa's handwriting, all performance and precision. Inside was an invitation wrapped in tulle and tied with a ribbon that cost more than I'd spend on groceries that week. Mr. and Mrs. George Kellerman request the honor of your presence at the wedding of their daughter Vanessa Grace Kellerman to Daniel Carter. It was almost laughable. They had cut me from the rehearsal dinner, excluded me from the family photos, and now 3 weeks late, they were extending a printed gesture, likely because someone had asked where Daniel's mother would be seated, likely because someone noticed the absence and they needed to clean it up. I set the invitation on the table, didn't tear it, didn't toss it. I left it there, like a body I didn't have the strength to bury yet. Instead, I opened the drawer beneath the sink and pulled out a small metal tin where I kept tools that didn't quite belong anywhere else: screwdrivers, old keys, a seam ripper I hadn't used in a decade. Underneath it all was a business card Martin had given me after closing: venue operations, emergency access. I called the number. A young woman named Denise answered, cheerful, professional. Yes, Miss Carter, we've already transitioned the admin portal to your ownership. Would you like staff on site during the event? No, I said. I'd like to walk through alone the morning of the wedding. There was a pause. Of course, just let us know what time. Sharp, 15, sharp. The morning arrived with heavy clouds, not rain, just that hanging gray that made everything feel unspoken. I wore the same navy coat, pressed this time, a darker blue blouse underneath. The kind of outfit meant to go unnoticed, but not forgettable. I pulled my bun tighter than usual, not out of vanity, out of control. When I unlocked the front doors of the Hawthorne estate, it was silent. No florists yet, no staff moving tables, just the click of my shoes on marble and the faint hum of climate control systems keeping the rooms perfect for guests who hadn't yet arrived. I walked the perimeter like I was memorizing a language, down the hallway with gilded sconces, through the ballroom with its cavernous hush. I stood behind the bar, ran my fingers over the polished wood where Daniel's best man would later lean. I stood on the altar dais where Vanessa would take her first steps as a wife, backlit by imported lilies. It wasn't grief I felt, it was distance. A mother is supposed to feel something in these moments: sentiment, memory, nostalgia, but all I could feel was how long I'd been held at arm's length, not just from their wedding, but from their lives. The last time Daniel called me without a reason was 4 years ago. Even then, it had been more habit than love. That closeness we once had, Band-Aids and piano recitals, birthday pancakes and all-night science fair posters, it had become an old photograph, flat, faded, stuck under a magnet on a fridge he no longer visited. But now I owned the stage where he'd promised someone else forever. Not as punishment, not as spectacle. Just correction. By the time I left, the florists were arriving. Trucks unloading pale roses, men in black vests checking off crates. One of them nodded at me as I locked the door behind me. Big day, he said cheerfully. I smiled faintly. Bigger than they know. At home, I waited. I didn't call, I didn't hint, I didn't post. I just sat at the table sipping tea while the weight of unacknowledged things filled the air like steam off the mug. At 2:41 p.m., the first message came. From Daniel. Did you change something at the venue? They said the lease wasn't finalized? I didn't respond. At 3:08, another. Mom? They're saying we can't access the main ballroom until the owner confirms. Are you the one they mean? I turned off the screen. Let the quiet answer him back. At 3:50, my landline rang. I stared at it for 2 rings, then picked it up and said nothing. Mom. Daniel's voice was sharp, low and barely holding back a tremor. What are you doing? What you taught me, I said calmly. Making space, protecting appearances. There was a pause. Then, this is a huge day, you know that. You made that clear, I said, so I've taken care of the venue. You can do this. I already have. He started to say something else, but I hung up. Not to punish him, to preserve myself. They got in, eventually. Daniel called the venue manager just after 4 p.m., and I had already given prior instruction to allow access. The panic, I knew, was never meant to last. It was meant to puncture, like a small, deliberate pause in a song someone thought they could conduct without you. They had their wedding, on schedule. The florist rushed, the cake arrived. Vanessa walked down the aisle to some carefully curated music that didn't matter half as much as she thought it would. The cameras clicked, the champagne popped, the night unfolded like it always would have. But not one of them noticed the difference. Because the change wasn't in the decor, it was in the silence. Ownership doesn't always announce itself. sometimes it simply waits, already present in the very floorboards someone else believes they're standing on freely. I didn't go to the ceremony. I wasn't invited. Not really. And I wasn't about to take a seat, offered only to keep up appearances. Instead, I waited until after. Until the guests had all cleared out, until the candles were snuffed and the music was done echoing in the walls. I walked back into the Hawthorne estate at midnight, keys in hand, heels silent on tile. The cleaners were scheduled for morning. The space was still dressed in shadows and leftover glitter, empty champagne glasses on the tables, flower petals scattered across the aisle like the aftermath of a play. The place smelled faintly of sweat and roses and false laughter. It was the same room that had once asked me to leave. Only now, it waited for me. I moved slowly down the aisle where Vanessa had walked hours earlier. The gold trim on the chairs glinted even in the low light. Their names were still printed on the menus, each card curled slightly from the humidity. I didn't touch anything. I just sat, front row, center seat, and I breathed. It was the first time in weeks that I allowed myself to do it fully. I imagined Gerald beside me, hand on mine, the way he used to squeeze once before our son did something big, school plays, graduation, the first night Daniel tried to teach himself to drive in the high school parking lot. He would have hated the extravagance, but he would have stayed silent for Daniel's sake. Gerald believed in giving people room to grow, even when they grew away from us. I used to believe that too. Until I realized some people grow away because you've become too easy to take for granted. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough for my back to ache and for a chill to creep into my shoes, but I didn't mind. The stillness was sacred. There was no audience, no bouquet, no moment to interrupt. It was just me, reclaiming space. Before I left, I took a folded napkin from the head table, not as a trophy, not as proof, but as a reminder I didn't need to be seated in their story to have a place in it. The next morning, I found a message on my answering machine. It was Daniel. Mom, I know you did something. I don't even understand how. But Vanessa's upset. She said you were seen there yesterday morning, and now you were back, after? There was a pause, a breath. I guess I just want to know why. I didn't return the call, not because I didn't have an answer, but because the question itself told me he still didn't understand. This wasn't about punishment. It was about presence. You can be forgotten by others and still remember yourself. You can be unwelcome and still belong. Later that day, I received a package at my door. No note, just a frame inside, wrapped in tissue. A wedding photo. Vanessa and Daniel, smiling at the altar, the background unmistakably mine, the dais I had stood on, now blurred behind their vows. At first, I thought it was a peace offering. But there was no note, no explanation, just the image, framed like a mirror I never asked for. I set it face down on the side table and left it there. It could sit quietly, just like I had. That night, I pulled out the deed again, not for reassurance, not to gloat, but to remind myself of the truth, that dignity once reclaimed doesn't need an audience. I wrote something on the back in pen, small and centered. I did not crash your wedding. I simply stood in the home I bought with the voice you thought I'd buried. Then I folded it, slid it back in the envelope, and returned it to the lockbox. Some things deserve to be kept, not flaunted. Not everything has to be seen to be real. I didn't hear from Daniel again for 9 days. 9 days of silence, though I knew from neighbors and passive whispers that they'd returned from their honeymoon. Bali, or Bora Bora, somewhere filtered and curated for social media, for aesthetic joy that looked like love from the outside. But silence has a weight, and I had learned long ago that it carries more truth than pleasantries ever will. On the 10th day, a knock came. Not a phone call, not a letter, a knock. I stood in the doorway for a full 3 seconds before I opened it, and there he was, Daniel, dressed neatly, though less polished than usual. The blazer too crisp, as if pulled from the dry cleaner that morning for the occasion. His hands were empty, and his eyes couldn't find mine. "Mom," he said. I waited, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. He shifted his weight. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without answering. He walked in like a guest in a stranger's home, noticed things he hadn't seen in years, the dent in the kitchen floor near the sink, the framed drawing from his kindergarten art class still pinned to the hallway wall, a crayon sun with the words to Mommy, love always. He didn't smile at it. He didn't say a word about it. We sat at the kitchen table, The same spot where I once taught him how to tie his shoes, where we filled out college forms, where we discussed the business plan that would eventually vanish like steam. I didn't know you could do all that, he said finally, voice low. With the venue, buying it, getting access, all of it. I let the silence stretch between us before replying. You didn't know, because you never asked. He looked up then. Really looked. That's not fair. I didn't flinch. Isn't it? He rubbed the bridge of his nose. I didn't mean for things to happen that way. You didn't mean for me to be erased. You just didn't object when it became convenient. His mouth opened, then closed. There it was, the apology suspended in his throat. The one that wanted to form but refused to be born without conditions, without justification. Vanessa, he began. I raised a hand gently. Don't make her the excuse. You had a choice. You had many. He leaned forward. I wanted the wedding to be perfect. It was, I said, just not for me. He stared at the table, fingers tapping a slow, uneven rhythm on the wood. I reached beneath the table and retrieved the frame they'd sent the wedding photo. I placed it between us. His shoulders stiffened when he saw it. Did you think I needed this? I asked. He said nothing. I was there, Daniel. Before the guests arrived, after they left. I've walked every inch of that space more than you ever will, not because of some need to ruin it, but because I needed to know I could be present without permission. He exhaled, long and low. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't ask you to fix it. I asked you to see it. Finally, his eyes lifted, red at the corners, brighter than before. I see it now. I nodded. Good. Then I stood, walked to the side cabinet, and pulled out a worn envelope. This, I said, placing it gently in front of him, is the breakdown of what I gave you for ink and olive. Every cent, every promise, every sacrifice. He looked down at it, didn't touch it, didn't open it. I'm not asking for repayment, I continued, but I am asking for recognition. He picked up the envelope, ran his thumb along the fold. I didn't forget, he said. You just stopped remembering out loud, I answered. He swallowed hard. We sat in silence for another few minutes, then he stood. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything, I said. Just do better. He walked to the door, turned once before opening it. Will you come for dinner next week? Just the two of us. I'll think about it, I said, honestly. He nodded, then left. Later that evening, I took the photo out of the frame, not to destroy it, but to free it. I slid it into a box beneath the bed, next to letters I'd written but never sent, cards from birthdays he no longer remembered, and a single dried rose from my wedding day to Gerald. A different kind of marriage, a different kind of memory. That night, I wrote something in my journal. He came to the door, but he didn't bring an apology, just proof that maybe, just maybe, he's still capable of finding one. The next day, I returned to the Hawthorne estate, not for ceremony, not for confrontation, but for something smaller and more lasting. Keys in my coat pocket, I passed the columns without pause. It no longer felt strange, walking through those doors. I didn't glance at the velvet drapes or the chandeliers anymore. I didn't count how many chairs were set or which flowers had been swapped. I knew the place now, not as a guest, not as someone briefly tolerated, but as someone who had decided it mattered. The staff had mostly cleared out. Denise, the site coordinator, waved as I passed her desk. Back again, Miss Carter? Just checking something, I said. She smiled. Let me know if you need a hand. I made my way past the ballroom and the bridal lounge, down the corridor most guests never explored. Beyond the kitchens and linen closets, behind an unlabeled mahogany door, was a room I'd claimed without ever asking. They called it the archive room, just a practical space where the original blueprints were stored, old guest books stacked in faded boxes, antique fixtures kept for refurbishment. It smelled like paper and varnish, forgotten things. I loved it for that reason alone. There was a single window, half frosted, that let in late morning light at an angle that dust could dance in. I pulled the cord on the lamp and settled into the overstuffed chair I'd had delivered 3 days after the purchase, a navy velvet armchair, wide-backed, low-slung, and dignified. It wasn't placed in the office, or the front lobby, or even the owner's suite. No one but me had sat in it. That was the point. This was the room where I let myself be still. I took out the small leather notebook I'd carried for years but only recently begun using again, not for to-do lists or financial notes, but for the kind of thoughts I'd always told myself I'd write down when I had more time. Time doesn't wait, It just accumulates. I wrote, "They threw me out of the room they built to impress strangers, so I found a room they never bothered to enter and made it my own." The truth is, I hadn't come to the estate that day to reflect on Daniel or Vanessa or the way the wedding unfolded like a velvet curtain that had no place for my shadow. I came because it was the first quiet moment I could claim in weeks, and I wanted to remember what it felt like to belong to myself. That afternoon, Denise sent me a brief message. A vendor from the wedding had left behind a decorative box. It was unlabeled, but had likely belonged to one of the guests. "I can toss it," she wrote, "unless you'd like to hold it." I told her I'd come by. The box was on a side table in the foyer, carved mahogany with brass hinges. No names, no initials. I opened it cautiously. Inside were folded notes, scraps of paper, little envelopes addressed in pen, wedding wishes, messages to the bride and groom from guests who hadn't wanted to leave a public signature in the guest book. I started to close it, none of my business after all, but something made me stop. One note, tucked near the bottom, was in a child's handwriting. It said, simply, "You're lucky to have a mom, don't forget that." I didn't recognize the name signed beneath it. Perhaps a family friend's child, a second cousin. I didn't need to. The words were enough. I closed the box and placed it back on the table. Let them come back for it. Let them read what their guests had really noticed. Or let it disappear, like most truth does when no one's brave enough to face it. I returned to the archive room that evening. The estate was quiet again. Most weddings booked here were for weekends, and midweek was when the building sighed and settled into itself. I didn't bring my notebook this time, just a thermos of coffee and a photo, one of Gerald and me from our 30th anniversary, sitting on a blanket by the lake. The world softened behind us. I propped it on the windowsill beside the lamp. He'd been a man of few words, but he'd have loved this room. He would have built a bookshelf by the wall. He'd have insisted I hang something in the window, even if it was just lace. And he would have told me, "You didn't lose them, Evelyn. They gave themselves away." Later that night, before locking up, I wrote one more line on a slip of paper and folded it into the back of my notebook. Ownership isn't power, it's memory, protected. Then I turned off the light, shut the door behind me, and walked out into the quiet parking lot beneath a bruised dusk sky. 2 weeks after Daniel's visit, I received an invitation from the Hawthorne estate staff. They were holding a local vendor open house, an annual event where florists, photographers, caterers, and musicians came to showcase their services. A wedding preview, they called it. Technically, I was now the host, though my name was printed nowhere on the program. Denise called to confirm my attendance. I told her I'd think about it. It wasn't fear that made me hesitate, it was precision. There's a difference between reclaiming power and performing it. I had no interest in becoming the kind of woman who strutted through halls just to remind others she owned the building. That wasn't who I'd ever been. And yet I knew something quiet and important waited for me there. Something more than memory. Something more than Daniel. So I told Denise yes. The day of the event, I wore the same navy coat. Some people would have worn something new, something striking, but I believed in continuity, in letting a room remember who you were, even if it once chose not to see you. When I arrived, the lobby was already humming. Tables draped in cream linens lined the walls, each one adorned with business cards, tiny cupcakes, or photo albums filled with beaming couples posed in perfect light. A string quartet played near the garden doors. Waitstaff passed hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. I moved through the space quietly, nodding to those who acknowledged me, observing the rest. Some of the vendors I remembered from Daniel's wedding, some I imagined remembered me, but none said a word. That suited me just fine. It was in the second-floor gallery space, a narrower hall lined with historical images of the estate, where I finally paused. A black and white photo hung near the back wall. 3 women in wide-brimmed hats standing beside the original construction site, their hands resting on rolled blueprints. A small brass plaque read, "The Ladies' Committee, 1913, founders of the Hawthorne Garden Initiative." I stared at them for a long while, unnamed, half smiling, yet clearly central, and somehow erased by time anyway. That struck me. Women often give their hands, their time, their savings, then are cropped from the picture as if the building rose from stone alone. Later that afternoon, a woman named Beatrice approached me. She ran a small bakery and had a display table beside the ballroom entrance. Petite, sharp-eyed, wearing an apron over her blouse like it was part of her identity. "I heard you're the new owner," she said, voice low but clear. I nodded. She smiled. Good, this place needed different hands. She offered me a lemon tart. I accepted. Neither of us said much more, but there was something in her look that told me she understood what most in the room hadn't even begun to guess. I sat at a table near the garden door and ate slowly, watching couples move past, arms linked, jotting notes about chair rentals and floral arches, each one hoping to buy a perfect beginning. None of them knew how many endings live inside these walls too. Around dusk, just before the event wrapped up, Denise handed me a manila folder. Inside were suggestions from the staff, ideas for how to improve the venue's offerings, expand its community use. A few proposals caught my attention: opening the ballroom one weekend a month for elder socials, offering discounted rentals for small local weddings, hosting storytelling nights led by senior volunteers. I thumbed through the pages in silence, heart tightening, not with sentiment, but with something fiercer: recognition. This was what it meant to shape legacy, not just own space, to let it become more than an answer to rejection, to turn it into an invitation. When I left the estate that night, the halls were dimmed, vendors were packing up, soft laughter echoing down the corridor. I took the long route out, pausing once more by the photo of the 3 women on the wall. They hadn't been named, but I knew now how to honor them. I would name the archive room after them. I would list every woman who had ever donated, contributed, cleaned, planned, planted, built, and been forgotten. The plaque would hang just outside the door. Small, quiet, permanent. It was late the following Friday when Vanessa showed up at my door. I knew it was her by the silhouette through the lace curtain, rigid posture, purse clutched high under one arm, the kind of practiced confidence that came from having never had to ask twice for anything. I opened the door without a word. "Evelyn," she said. "No Mrs. Carter, no Mom, just my first name like it had always been a placeholder." I stepped aside. She didn't thank me, but entered slowly, taking in the space with attention that didn't belong to the room. I could feel her discomfort, like perfume, intentional, lingering. We sat at the kitchen table. I didn't offer her tea. She didn't ask. "I thought we should talk," she said, crossing her legs too tightly. I waited. Her eyes flicked to the fridge, the counter, the faint hum of the clock. Anything but me. "I know you've been involved with the venue. I didn't realize how involved until recently." She paused there, clearly waiting for a reaction. I gave her none. She leaned in slightly. Daniel's confused, hurt even. This time, I did speak. "And you?" Her lip twitched. "I'm surprised, and frankly, a bit concerned." "About?" She hesitated. "About appearances." I looked at her closely then. She wore elegance like armor-pressed blouse, diamond studs, even her grief had been color-coordinated. But I could see the ripple under the surface, the loss of control. "Let me guess," I said. "You're worried people will find out the woman you cut from your wedding now owns the place where it was held." She blinked. "Just once. I didn't cut you. That was a logistics decision." I finished for her. "Yes, I've heard." She stared at me, searching for softness. I didn't give her cruelty, just clarity. I gave Daniel his start, paid for his first business, raised him alone after Gerald died. I didn't demand payback. I didn't ask for gratitude, but I do expect recognition. "I never said you didn't matter." "No," I replied. "You just made sure the room didn't say it either." She looked away. For a long time, the kitchen was silent. Then, slowly, she stood. "I didn't come here to argue. I came to say, we don't need this tension." "Neither do I said plainly. "But I also don't need to be erased to keep things comfortable." She froze there, half standing, half expecting forgiveness. I didn't offer it. Instead, I walked to the hallway, pulled down a slim black envelope from the shelf, and returned to place it on the table. "What's this?" "A contract draft for an annual memorial lecture at the venue, in Gerald's name, and mine." Her mouth parted. "There will be photos, a small plaque, a note in every wedding packet explaining who preserved the space they're using." She stared at the envelope like it might detonate. "I'm not asking for your approval," I added, "but I thought it polite to inform you before it appears on your anniversary." She didn't take the envelope. She just turned and walked out. No goodbye, no threat, only silence. And I sat back down, hands steady around the curve of the ceramic mug I hadn't poured from. That night, I walked to the small park at the end of my street. There was a bench Gerald once helped fund when the neighborhood lobbied for more green space. His name was etched into a small plaque on the side, so modest you'd miss it if you weren't sitting there. I sat, watching the breeze stir the leaves, listening to the squeak of a swing somewhere out of sight. There's something freeing about not being owed. Once, I had longed for Daniel to say thank you, to look at me and name the sacrifices I'd layered beneath his life. But now, I knew what was mine had never required his acknowledgement to exist. 3 days later, Denise emailed me the finalized event calendar. The archive room was now listed on the Hawthorne Estate's official website. Under a new name, the Carter Room, in honor of Gerald and Evelyn Carter, for whom memory was never passive. She hadn't told me she was doing it. She just attached a photo of the plaque, already hung, polished brass, gleaming on walnut. It was enough. No announcement, no ribbon cutting, just permanence. The week the plaque went up, I received 3 unexpected letters. Not emails, not texts, actual letters. The first came from Beatrice, the baker with the lemon tarts. She wrote in tidy, looping cursive, and signed only her first name. I never knew the story behind the new ownership, but I guessed, and I want you to know, for women like me, quiet women, working women, you did something bigger than anyone will say out loud. I see it, we see it. The second was from a teacher who had used the estate's smaller conference room for a literacy night. He'd found out about the Carter Room when bringing in his 6th grade volunteers. My students asked why your name was on the door. I told them sometimes the people who preserve history are the ones it tried to forget. And the third came from a name I hadn't heard in over a decade. Miriam Chan. One of Daniel's high school friends. She had eaten dinner at my table more times than I could count. Quiet, respectful, always helping with dishes. She wrote, "When I saw your name listed on the site, I cried. I remembered the way you used to sit on the porch with a cup of tea after long shifts, and how you never interrupted when we talked, only asked questions that made us think. I think of that often, of how you saw people, not just what they did. I've learned to do the same in my classroom. Thank you." I held that letter in both hands for a long time. It felt heavier than it was, like something sacred had been folded between the lines. It had taken years, but the words I thought had evaporated into silence were, in fact, still circling, waiting for their echo. I spent that afternoon at the estate. No reason, no meeting, just presence. I stopped first in the garden, where a few new planters had been installed along the west wall, part of a community beautification grant. 2 teenagers were painting them in soft pastels, carefully tracing vines and leaves with steady brushes. I didn't interrupt, just nodded as I passed. Inside, I walked the halls I knew by heart now. The ballroom was empty, quiet, echoes carried too easily when the chairs weren't out. But it was the Carter Room that drew me that day. It had changed already. 2 more framed photos had been added, a picture of Gerald helping to raise the venue's original event tent in the late 80s, and another of me at a vendor fair, listening to a young florist talk about her first season in business. I didn't remember the moment, but someone had. Someone had thought it was worth documenting. That, more than any plaque or press release, told me something real had rooted. As I turned to leave, I noticed a girl, maybe 16, sitting on the floor just outside the Carter Room, sketchpad in her lap, earbuds in. She looked up briefly, startled to see me. "Sorry," she said. "I wasn't in the way, was I?" "Not at all," I replied. She hesitated. "I like this hallway. It's quiet, and kind of strong." I smiled. "That's a good way to describe it." She returned the smile, small, genuine, and looked back at her page. "Do you draw often?" I asked. "Only when something makes me feel steady." I wanted to ask more, but I didn't. She wasn't there for questions. She was there because something about the space made her feel less invisible. That was enough. When I got home, I took down the last photo I had of Daniel as a child. Age 5, cheeks still soft with baby roundness, grinning with a missing tooth and a mismatched scarf I'd knitted for him. I didn't remove it because I was angry. I removed it because I had spent too long defining motherhood by who acknowledged it. I placed the photo in a box labeled Spring Storage and left the hallway wall blank. Not as erasure, but as space, room, now, for other memories to step in. That evening, as the sky turned a bruised violet outside my kitchen window, I brewed tea and opened my notebook. I wrote only one sentence. "Legacy is not what they remember about you. It's what they feel braver to become because of you." I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The letter came folded in thirds, tucked inside an envelope without a return address. My name was written in small, careful handwriting across the front. I opened it at the kitchen table, where most things of importance had unfolded in my life: school forms, bills, condolence cards, and now this. I hope this letter finds you well. I know I'm writing with no claim to your time, but I wanted to try anyway. I was one of the servers at your son's wedding. My heart paused, just long enough for the space between words to widen. I noticed you that morning. You were there before the guests. I was setting out chairs, and I saw you walking down the aisle alone. You weren't wearing black or gray, you were wearing navy, and you moved like someone who didn't need to be watched to know who she was. The letter went on for a page and a half, filled with details: how she hadn't known the estate had a new owner until her friend sent her the local newsletter, how she felt something shift that day, even if she couldn't name it. I'm writing because I've spent a lot of my life waiting for permission, watching doors I didn't know I had the right to open. Seeing you that morning, in that place, made me wonder what it would be like to walk into a space and not ask who it was for. I wanted to say thank you. No signature, just a first initial R. It was the kind of note people don't expect a reply to, a note meant to unburden something, or plant it. I folded it back along its creases and slid it into the small drawer near my tea kettle, with the others I'd received. A quiet archive of being seen. That weekend, the venue hosted a memorial service for a woman I'd never met. Her daughter had found the Carter Room online and requested the space because it felt like someone had loved the walls. Denise forwarded the request to me, unsure if I wanted to approve a non-wedding event. I didn't hesitate. Let her come, I said. Grief deserves good light and high ceilings. When I arrived the morning of the service, everything had already been arranged: simple white chairs, a small easel of photos, vases of hydrangeas on each table. At the back of the room stood a large board titled The Unwritten Moments. Blank cards and pens rested nearby, inviting guests to write memories the obituary might have missed. It was an idea I wish I'd thought of years ago. As people trickled in, I stayed near the doorway, not imposing, just observing. Most didn't know who I was, some likely assumed I was related. A man mid-30s, kind eyes approached me with a card in hand. "Do you know Eleanor?" he asked. "Tao," I said gently, "but I know what it means to have someone matter without a microphone." He looked down at his card and nodded. Then he handed me a pen. "Write one anyway," he said, "even if you didn't know her." I hesitated, not because I was unsure, but because I knew how rare it was to be asked. I wrote, "Whoever she was, she raised people who notice." Then I pinned it to the board. After the service ended, I returned to the ballroom, empty again, chairs being folded, petals swept from the aisle. The scent of lilies had lingered longer than the conversations. I stood at the edge of the dais, the same one where Daniel had once stood, eyes forward, pretending he didn't see the absence behind him. Only now, I wasn't an absence. I was the reason the lights still turned on. Later that night, I unlocked the archive room and sat without turning on the lamp. The window gave off just enough glow from the moon and streetlights outside to paint the walls with silver. No music, no voices, just breath and wood and quiet. I thought about the people who had walked through these doors today. People mourning, remembering, listening. None of them came because of me. And yet none of them could have come without me. There is a kind of fulfillment that doesn't shout, a power that doesn't demand center stage. I used to think dignity was about being acknowledged. Now I knew it was about holding space, even when you're not asked to. Especially then. The idea came quietly. Not in a moment of inspiration, but in the quiet after one, the kind that follows when the last chair has been put away, when the lights are dimmed and no one is left to impress. That's when a thought settles in you, like a memory you didn't realize was yours. I was walking the Hawthorne Estate halls after the memorial when I passed the old tea room, unused, shuttered more often than not, too small for weddings, too intimate for galas, but still elegant, with its bay window and tiled hearth and the walnut table that had likely seen more life in its early days than it had in the past 2 decades. I paused at the door. The hinges creaked as I pushed it open. Dust flecked the light. The smell of age lingered. Old wood, dried flowers, polish, not rot, just waiting. The table had 10 chairs, mismatched slightly in style, as if the original set had grown up and scattered and left behind cousins. I ran my hand over the tabletop. The finish had faded along the edges. I remembered Sunday dinners when Daniel was young. Not the big ones, not the ones with candles and sides cooked all day, the small ones. The quiet plates of leftovers, the kind of meal that didn't ask to be remembered and yet stayed anyway. I looked around that forgotten tea room and thought, there should be something here, something steady, something that doesn't require an invitation. By the following Monday, I had a name: the Table Project. I printed the words on a single sheet of paper and taped it to the inside of the tea room door. It wasn't marketing, it was a declaration. By Wednesday, I met with Denise and 2 part-time staff members. I asked for 1 evening a month, no rentals, no reservations, just a space where people could come, sit, and talk. No sign-ups? Denise asked. No RSVPs? No, I said, you don't need to be counted to belong. The others looked uncertain, but they agreed. The first evening, 5 people showed up. A man in a janitor's uniform, a retired art teacher, a couple in their 70s holding hands like teenagers, and a young woman who didn't say a word the entire night but listened so intently it felt like prayer. There was no agenda, no script, just soup in a pot, warm bread wrapped in cloth, a pitcher of water with lemon slices, and a question I wrote on a folded card in the center of the table. What have you done that no one ever thanked you for? No one rushed to answer. We ate first. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was shared, like we all needed to chew through something more than food. When the words did come, they came slowly. I stayed, the art teacher said, through years of a marriage that never asked me to. I stayed. The janitor nodded. I fixed things that weren't mine, quietly, so people could come back the next day and think the world had always worked. The couple spoke last. We forgave each other, not with announcements, just with time, and we never told anyone what it cost. No one asked names, no one needed to. At the end of the evening, as I rinsed the bowls and wiped the table down, the young woman came up to me. Her eyes were damp, but she wasn't crying. Can I come again? She asked. Of course, I said. But what if I never speak? I smiled. Then you'll be listened to in a different way. Over the next 3 months, the Table Project grew. Not in numbers, never more than a dozen people at a time, but in depth. Word spread not through flyers or websites, but through whispers, stories passed between friends, or confessions in corner shops. One night, a florist came and laid a single dahlia at every plate. No explanation. Another evening, a boy no older than 10 came with his grandmother. He said his only dream was to learn how to make rice properly. The room laughed softly, and then the grandmother taught us. The questions changed. The table stayed the same. Sometimes I didn't speak at all. I just refilled water glasses and listened. Sometimes I told stories, ones I hadn't touched in years, about Gerald, about the quiet resilience of folding laundry at midnight, about what it felt like to be dismissed, and what it cost to stay standing. No one ever asked me about Daniel, and I never offered, not out of secrecy, but out of protection. That was a separate hunger. This table was for something else. One night, after everyone left, I found a note tucked beneath my napkin. You gave me back something I hadn't named yet. Thank you for the room. I didn't know who had written it. It didn't matter. I folded it gently and slipped it into my notebook. And that night, as I turned out the lights and stood at the door, I realized the wedding I'd been excluded from had only been a prologue. This was the ceremony I had come here to hold. And I didn't need a dress code, a guest list, or a photographer to prove it mattered. The Hawthorne estate was quiet again. That familiar, after-hours stillness. Chairs stacked. Tonight had been different. Not louder, not fuller, just heavier in a way I hadn't expected. A woman named Celia had spoken for the first time. She had been coming to the table for 3 months, always early, always helpful, never vocal, but tonight she picked up the folded card, read it aloud, and then held it to her chest. What is something you left behind that was never returned? She didn't cry. She said, my name. I gave it up when I married. Then I gave it up again when I left. Now I write it on everything I own, even food containers, just to prove it's still mine. There had been silence after that. Not out of awkwardness, but reverence. No one followed her story with another. We didn't need to. I had washed the last of the dishes alone after they left. The scent of garlic and rosemary still lingered in the air, clinging to the tablecloths and the sleeves of my sweater. My back ached, my knees were tired, but it was a good ache, a right kind of tired. I sat now at the end of the long wooden table, with the last candle still flickering beside me. The kind of light that doesn't beg to last, it simply does, until it can't. I wasn't thinking of Daniel, not really. Not the version I once rocked to sleep, or the man who had turned his gaze away on his wedding day. I had let him live outside the center of me now. But I thought of what it meant to stay. Not stay in a room or a house or a job, but in yourself, in the part of you that doesn't flinch when someone else doesn't make space for it. I remembered something Gerald once said on our 27th anniversary, sitting in the car outside a movie theater that was too crowded for us to go in. We don't need to be in the building, we've already got the story. At the time, I laughed, told him he was being overly poetic, but now I finally understood what he meant. The story had never needed the approval of an usher. A soft knock came on the tea room door. I turned, unsure whether I'd imagined it, but then it opened, slowly, and Denise stepped inside. Her coat was still buttoned, keys in hand. She looked like she was just passing through, but something in her expression said otherwise. I saw the light was still on, she said. Didn't mean to interrupt. You're not. She hesitated. Can I sit? I nodded, gesturing to the chair across from me. She lowered herself into it, like someone unsure whether they were still allowed to rest. For a moment, we said nothing. Then she spoke. I've worked at this estate for 8 years. I've seen it change hands 3 times. I've seen trends come and go, decor shifts, planner rotations, even furniture cycles. But I've never seen a place feel more human than it does now. I watched her carefully. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't offering flattery. You turned the most unused room in this building into the heart of it, she said. I didn't turn it into anything, I replied. I just cleared away what kept it from being itself. Denise smiled. That's more than most people ever manage with rooms or with lives. She stood after that, didn't linger. Let me know if you ever need help setting up, I mean it. I will, I said. Then she was gone. The candle had burned down to the end. I pinched the wick, the smoke curling into a gentle farewell. Before I left, I placed a new card at the center of the table for next month's gathering. I wrote it slowly, deliberately. What's something you've built that no one else noticed but you still return to anyway? I left it there, unfolded, waiting. On the way out, I paused in the ballroom one last time. It still held echoes, even when no one was speaking. Somewhere in its beams and beams, the walls remembered. I approached the dais again. But this time, I didn't step onto it. I placed my hand on the edge of the platform, gently, firmly, and whispered. I didn't need the spotlight, I just needed the key. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked back into the night that had never stopped holding room for me.